Over.
You're live.
This is Senate Transportation. It's Tuesday, February 13th. We're continuing our discussion with budgets at the Agency of Transportation. This time it's going to be public transit. We have Ross McDonald here with us to walk us through that as part of the transportation budget for FY25.
Thank you, Senator. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen.
Yes, please.
See that?
You
Share?
are co-host.
I see this. The share, not share, confirm sharing.
There you go.
There we are. There we go. Okay, thank you again. And yeah, for us, we have a half hour. I'm going to move fairly quickly through the slides until we get to the numbers. And if we need to, we can revisit. But public transit program continues to rebuild from the COVID pandemic. We did see a 21% ridership increase in 2023, still about 17% off from pre-COVID, but we're 35% off due to commuting services and those impacts. And so if it's not a commuting service, many times they build back up to or above pre-pandemic levels. That's a little bit better than most other areas in the country reporting out their ridership. We launched another 3 microtransit pilots.
In addition to how many that are current ongoing?
One. So Montpelier was the original. We were hoping to get Barrie also up and running with GMT's capacity issues, and we're delayed a little bit on this one.
But they're doing on-demand rides with that.
Oh, absolutely. Right. This would just be a new microtransit pilot, picking up some of those, but not all of the demand response. We received the largest award by far from our low and no emissions bus and bus facilities program last year, taking advantage of the VW settlement funds, primarily for 17 heavy-duty buses in the Burlington area, which brings us to a total of $38.6 million, with $4.3 million in VW settlement funds, $4.9 in state and local funds. That gives us a total of 44 e-buses and their related infrastructure and fit up at the utility and facility level. We only have 8 now on the road, as we have a ton of back ordered vehicles, and we're waiting for specs to materialize that can effectively be placed into the fleet. So we need about 200 miles and about 8 or 9 hours of operation. We get by with a little bit less, but then when we talk about our hilly and chilly climates, we certainly want to have some latitude there. But we are moving forward and are receiving bids for our electric buses.
For 44 electric buses.
For those 44. And we'll also talk about bringing in some carbon reduction funds. And so in your white book, when we were putting this together, we had no carbon reduction funds being injected into the transit budget officially. There was the carbon reduction plan and where transit fits. And now I have an updated white book package for you to replace that incorporates carbon reduction funds, which we plan to spend $4 million of this year's state federal dollar allotment in for 20 narrow body e-Sprinter type vans. Those have really come to the market in a better with better specs than the cutaway models that make up 65% of our fleet. So we expect to transition a percentage of our cutaway fleet into the narrow body vans. And this is another effort to electrify our fleet, which is different than just relying on the one low and no emissions federal grant program.
What is the total fleet number of buses?
About 440.
So we're getting to around 10%, or we will once we get all these buses deployed.
Funded for 10%, and then another 20. We're on the way. And once we clear this year, what we plan to do is really focus on the facility fit up, whether it's fire suppression or other safety issues, the training required to the staff. We don't expect to ask for too many vehicles, but we are expecting to ask for quite a few dollars for those other elements so that we can get that comfort and credibility at the provider level to take these on. It's only going to work if they're running toward these. And so that's my commitment, certainly with GMT, who taking on 17 heavy duty buses at one time is a big ask. We have decided we'll let those run through the pipeline over the next couple of years, and we'll work on the rural facilities and see what the narrow bodies, e-sprinters do. And the electrification, we have a public transit policy plan coming up where we'll reassess the schedule and share that with you this time next year.
If we're here, would be
I'm gonna lose my election, so I won't be here.
Well, I think your chances more than mine, Senator. But we're all on looking at those types of scenarios. But we also continue to grow out the Mobility and Transportation Innovation Grant Program that was founded at the House a few years ago. Really a nice program for us to award unique and smaller transportation demand management programs to see if there are scalable options, return on investments. They all use a carbon reduction calculator. So that continues to be a big part of our program through the Go Vermont TDM program. And we did construct and open up a new transit facility in the Rutland area, which looks great.
Are all the MTI projects either TDM or microtransit, or is there any other innovative grants you do that?
Well, there's some work from home type studies. There's efforts to help Car Share Vermont. There's efforts to support community rides in Barrie, microtransit services, e-bike.
Community ride, not microtransit.
Community rides at this point is part of our demand response service. They would like to.
That would be part of that's a TDM project.
You got it. And they also are looking to do a scaled taxi type service and a rural Uber type of approach. And getting contracts with schools and Department of Labor for job access. We're working with them as best we can and really seeing if that's an opportunity to scale up our capacity in a cost-effective way, rather than just asking our providers to keep doing more and different and better. Are there other agencies like Valley Vista or even Genesis Promise who may be able to take on some vehicles and provide some capacity, not only for their own clients, but for others in their community that we'll be further investigating and supporting in the next few years. So we know that there's always opportunities with transit, and our public transit policy plan update is due next year. And this is really allows us to take a look at our transportation equity plan, our older adults and persons with disability program, electrification schedules, and reconsider and restate our priorities. Happy to share the recommendations from our last plan from 5 years ago, but I'm happy to say we have looked at zero fare service, using better technologies like the Transit app, looking at microtransit, electrifying our fleet for better brand recognition and better operations, and hopefully less maintenance. So it was really nice to see to go through the providers in the summit earlier this fiscal year and detailing how we really have hit on most of those recommendations. This is not a plan that sits on the shelf, as they say. We want to continue to work with DEVA and the Medicaid program to ensure that we have this braided system. One of the big takeaways from that legislative report was just confirming the common sense approach that in a small area like Vermont with 640,000 folks, 7 transit providers, to braid those demand response services from DEVA and the Medicaid non-emergency medical transportation trips, and our older and persons with disability program, and our recovery and job access. The more we can do together, the better we can serve everyone with that shared capacity and overheads and investments. So we'll continue to work with AHS to see what we can do to ensure that any delivery approach considers all of Vermont and all of our shared clients. And that's a big Venn diagram with us sharing our clients together. Always looking to improve our passenger amenities, and through Capstone, trying to promote our community driver program, which includes volunteers, building that network of advocates. We're not able to just get everybody where they want to get to with this current funding and service approach.
On your improved passenger amenities, I have lots of constituents, and especially in the Burlington area, looking at private providers, that people that take the bus that don't have single occupancy vehicles that take these transportation modes also often take, Greyhound or the other ones out of town. How do you feel about any ways that we could make sure that those Greyhound services could leverage those same amenities when people are taking public transportation to also be able to wait in the same facilities? What are your thoughts on that topic area?
The RPCs and the planning process is important, that we push out what we're planning on a service level, and then the RPCs and the local communities receiving that and making sure that they're working to accommodate those services as best we can, whether that's placement of bus shelters, posting schedules, or allowing for those properties to be used for bus shelters or bus stops. Good example would be Burlington Airport, where Greyhound used to have a presence inside the bus stop at the end of the drop-off location. And when after COVID came back, and that inside presence was then used for law enforcement, and was not offered for Greyhound to come back into. So Greyhound took that area off their schedule, saying, well, we're not welcome at the airport. And that really wasn't the case since then. And I'm aware of a few conversations that you've been part of. We have gone back to the airport with FlixBus, the owners of Greyhound, to put that bus stop on the schedule. It's one that's used as much as the downtown transit center for the Premier Coach Route 7 services. And so it's that type of planning, as well as advocating for these things as these issues come up. But we do want bus shelters to be placed, and those bus shelters be clean and inviting and showing respect to the passenger. That's always a great opportunity to brand and to show value in the service, rather than try to put it in the back where very few people can see it. So those amenities also mean the transit app, which 8,000 people use every week, which is a big number for Vermont, and safe, comfortable trips. And are we dealing with disruptive passengers the way that we'd always, treated these instances in the past? I think we need more policies, more training. De-escalation is something I just came from my office talking about the training to try to help with these types of things. So passenger amenities isn't just the transit stop in the bus. It really is the services, the communication between these organizations to their riders. And so we're working on those items as well. Challenges, and here's the broken record. The costs are increasing. You're aware of, the VTrans overall issues with materials and labor and those things. We are looking at 30% cost increases since COVID, and to sustain services are getting a little bit more challenging, but we've been able to do that today. Our volunteer numbers before COVID were about 300 volunteers, providing over 50% of our demand response trips. We have 166 volunteers now, and that has really increased that demand response mode of cost from $24 per trip pre-COVID to over $40 now. Right away, we know with an aging population and increase in that demand, are we able to use microtransit technology, community driver efforts to not only get more volunteers, but other low-cost options, maybe Capstone's part of that, to build that capacity without using just traditional transit. When we go nationally, they say, wow, you've got the largest rural budget in the nation. That's great. Can you speak to us? When I come into Vermont and I go to meeting about where's all the, there's no transit in Vermont. So there's that disconnect. And the reality is there are mobility gaps for the youth, for access to jobs. We continue to use our program as best we can to meet essential needs, but we understand that we're not successful in getting everybody where they need to get to.
Do we have the largest by per capita?
I have a couple slides to share with you, Senator, but in terms of our investments, this administration and legislature has put us in a very enviable spot when we talk to other rural states. Ridership, again, back to pre-pandemic, those commuter routes are sticky, and when we talk about VMT and carbon reduction, is that a bad thing if we still have that productivity? I know my staff, they generally, this is Jeremy, a staff member who started, so I want to show him this process, but so that's where we are with ridership. On the,
Volunteers are paid a stipend, is that how they're so much cents per mile for vehicle use and all that?
mileage reimbursement, and because it's a reimbursement of their costs, then it doesn't affect their income and their status on, pensions,
Not
other
taxed,
programs.
and it's not taxed.
And it's not taxed. So no 1099 required. So that has been key for us.
Don't tell Senator Chin that that's not taxed.
Oh, I'll tell you. It's, yeah, it's coming.
So this is really a quick, we call it key performance indicators, and we have more, but this is what we thought, we could fit in here, and happy to talk specifically about more nuanced details. But looking at these demand response services, these areas are carrying people on Medicaid, people who qualify for the older and persons with disability program, or recovery and job access all together. It's very equitable, and everybody uses the same system, whether you call or use the app for your trips. And we can see that overall costs are less than the $41, which average demand response costs in FY23. And that's on a
Pilot cost per passenger.
yeah, I'm sorry, in the middle.
Per passenger.
Pilot
per
cost, yeah, per passenger per day. Each time we pick somebody up, it's $28 in GMT, all the way down to about $15 in Morrisville. And
So it's almost the same as per ride.
Yeah, exactly.
Basically.
And now the general public can use it, and if we are providing those trips to the non-emergency medical transportation client, they're not waiting 48 hours to make the call and those things. And
how's that cost compared to the other costs?
Our demand response is 41. Then if we looked at in-town services, the regular circulators, they're around 20. I don't want to misstate. Route performance report would show it's in the low 20s. So about that same, and it's all about how many vehicles do you have and how many drivers are needed. And then it's very scalable. And we heard Caleb last week really talking about in the rural areas, this could be a model that takes on a life of its own if we get volunteers to provide some of these trips. If we get hourly people at lower costs, looking at Derby or Keenan to set something up would be quite different than trying to replace 3 routes in Brattleboro. And so they have a mobility for all plan, and we'll continue RCT. I'm sorry, and I'm really looking forward to seeing if we could afford some level of pilot to see how far we could go with microtransit. The other piece with microtransit is if we have hundreds of thousands of trips being conducted through dial a ride, 48-hour notice, calling into a human, could we set them up with the IT to schedule their trips on their own? It goes in the system, and they're automatically being scheduled with some oversight rather than that full admin cost per trip, which can be $10 a ride. And so that's the type of next steps or value that Dan Courier, my right-hand man, and Jeremy here, who's just starting, who was an operator for years at GMT, we're thinking about, can we improve all of our demand response with some of the components of microtransit, understanding we can't have microtransit in every town, or can we do a few days a week? Those types of scenarios will be the next steps of consideration. Manchester is doing very well. Morrisville, nothing but good things from Caleb. Windsor, they didn't have a service. They had to do the dial-a-ride. And so now those people who are using them, and the community feel like this is a real great thing, maybe that helps us justify the investments that we're asking them to make every year and during town meeting day.
All right, Senator,
Oh, where are you going? You had a question?
are are any of these microtransit pilots charging?
No, and so outside of Chittenden County, it maintains fare free to the extent possible. In Montpelier, we have a real issue with no-shows or some, we always blame the kids, but people scheduling 3 trips in the afternoon and just taking the one that they end up using, because sometimes you don't know.
Yeah.
That's kind of an efficiency killer. So we're wondering if charging a fare for our microtransit just to have some skin in the game. It does cost a little bit more money for the software, and it's more valuable. So maybe we can justify that type of return to fare, so that's something to also consider, whether it's on operational efficiency or generating some other funds to match those federal dollars.
That makes perfect sense to me. I don't know why we're not charging something for those.
I think most people would pay.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, and especially if you got better service, Senator Engel.
The Morrisville pilot seems to be having great success, but great excitement. I mean, it's just everybody's talking about Morrisville. I mean, everywhere you go up that way, is there something that we're doing different there, or is it just because there hadn't been a program like that before? But I look at the numbers; they look fantastic as far as costs and all of that. I mean, is there a different unit there that's more cost efficient? All the above. What's going on there?
There's a lot of nuance, but more similarities than differences, Senator. If you're in the Windsor area, they're saying the same thing.
Okay.
But in Montpelier, where there were 2.5 routes, you have some people like, I just needed the schedule and went to the bus stop, and if it was late, but I didn't have to manage it myself. So about 40% of the survey respondents after the first year or two came back and said, we would rather go back to the fixed routes that we had. That still leaves 60% saying, yeah, now you come out to my area. Now I don't have to call to get a ride up to Hospital Hill because I'm a Medicaid client. And so it's a real mixed bag where you're replacing service, but where you are, if you're replacing one vehicle for one microtransit, we're getting really great responses. Replacing 2 or 3 routes with 3 or 4 vehicles all traveling around, we're not getting the same type of response and support and feedback. So this is what we're doing. The pilots are fare free. We're ready to support fares in Montpelier and FY25 if that's something that GMT suggests. Of course, when you're collecting fares on the rural side before COVID, $570,000 total fares. 250,000 of that comes off operations. The other 250, is for the match, the non-federal match. So to save 250,000 federal dollars and to buy all the fare collection equipment and to manage the money exchange, to get 4 to 7, 9% fare box recovery and spend 3% on money management while people show up to the bus and they're like, wait, is this the $1 or the $2 trip? This is just we're part of a national study and the only state that has free rural transit, so we're getting a lot of attention. We did
We're the only state that has free rural transit, and our transit providers are all running out of money.
Well, $500,000 on a $50 million budget is to be considered, and no one is running out of money. We have some charts to take a look at, but when we talk about the return on this, we did a study for the legislature 3-4 years ago, how to increase transit usage. And the number one requirement or request or recommendation was go zero fare and just let folks get on and try it and not have to buy the bus pass and do those types of things. So when we get to that slide, we'll talk a little bit about it. But if we were in 2016 looking at the 3-year projection, we were nervous. And 2020 coming out of COVID, we were really nervous. And right now we're continuing I see the same numbers that all of our providers do. We're part of that study. And
There's 6 zeros on that chart. That was hard to see the number.
Oh, I'm sorry,
Those are all
2015 to
30 million? 300 million.
no, this is 45 million in
Okay,
2025
so there's
proposed.
6 zeros.
And when I got here, it was 18, 20 million, 17 years ago. So this legislature and our administrations have really supported us to sustain and to pilot and not add new services for up to 20 years plus. But when we talk,
Wait. Backside, so the green is the total budget amount and the dark green is what the states contributed.
that's right.
So I don't see as much of an increase in what the states contributed relative to what the total budget
And
amount is.
that's been federal money. It hasn't been at the local match or something.
That's right. So the total state went down in pandemic years because we had the COVID 100% dollars to pay for everything. And so not only did we save money on the state side, but the locals were able to add to their reserves for years. But now we're back to post-COVID with increased costs, and their local share is under pressure. Our local share started at 9 million this year that you approved. After we got the applications, we went back to the budget committee and Bradley and asked if there was any way that we could generate a little bit more to support these applications and sustained services. And they came up with up to $1 million through the Pay Act. So this year, the number is 9.8 million.
Vacancy savings. When you say through the Pay Act, that's vacancy savings? Or what?
Yes, exactly. And so, not to be counted on, but that got us through, and that allowed me to justify the dollars that we're asking you to consider now, which is at 9.8 million. So we're trying to keep that level to this year's revised number. And you can see like how we were doing with ridership. But this is what I want to show and get to Senator Chittenden, which is when we put together our non-federal funding, we looked at the rural side of things, which is what our program is responsible for. And then we also provide about half of the funding to the urban side of things. So for years and years, we've understood that there were funding and financial cliff conversations at GMT Urban. But when we look at the rural services, we've been consistently able to meet the challenge to sustain our services. So when we see FY25 1.9 up, that's not because whatever's left goes to GMT Urban to help with their program. We don't operate in a vacuum and hope that GMT does well. We will have a budget of $3 million on a flex of FHWA that goes directly to their FTA funds and in the regional office. And last year it was 5.1 million. And so we will support them as best as we can. But overall, when we talk about the $3 million shortfall in a few years' time, rural isn't in that same position, but rural and urban together are facing severe shortages. So we're hoping that GMT will work through their own board of commissioners right now. Yeah.
I'm trying to reconcile what you're saying with what I'm seeing. So I see the third row, statewide rural surplus. Right now it's 1.9 million this year, and then you're expecting 119,000, then you're expecting a deficit in 27, but that's sustainable.
Well, when we go back, if I may,
Yeah.
it's never exactly flat. And so I have my own budget process, and I bring in GMT's urban's issues and the rural issues, microtransit, demand, issues, capital, electrification. And they've been, fortunately, allowing us to continue operations as well as GMT Urban. They haven't had to cut services since I've been around. So
But you don't think they will need to with the 3.2 million deficit?
there's a couple dynamics to play out before we see.
Did you hear Clayton Clark's testimony though? I mean, they are saying that we are not sustainable. We're going to have to cut services. So they're saying that absent a change. Okay.
What they told us, and we get in the nuance of things, and we'll go to the finance committees and like 50% of their service hours are being conducted by drivers on time and a half or double time. That's a big number. And if they could deal with that issue. If they could take a look at their services that are not meeting performance thresholds and hour, cost per hour, cost per passenger. If they were to retool and replan, if they could get more funds from the Hill institutions, if they get more funds from us, I mean, we expect that they can provide some effort and demonstrate some savings that we can meet them in the middle like we have been. And as I mentioned, every year in our budget, we were putting $3 million into our budget to transfer to the 5307 urban. It hasn't been 3 million since in years and years. It's been 4, it's been 5, and we can take a look at that. Yeah.
This is important. I heard in that testimony very dire warnings that GMT is made up of the carcasses of failed public transit, is what I recall him saying. And that if anything, he's saying we are on that same trajectory. And so what happens if GMT collapses and fails? Does the state then you're going to have to assume this responsibility and then apply your management practices that you're saying that they should be doing regarding cutting overtime hours? I mean, is that the path that we're on, where GMT collapses and just VTrans takes over Chittenden County bus service?
I don't know under those types of scenarios the way it would go, Senator. Certainly, we have a few years to do the work to see what that sustainable number to sustain service is going to look like. Again, 50% of their service hours at time and a half or double time is a concern to us, and say, well, does that mean 1 million or so? I don't know what that number would be if they could deal with that issue. Now, for us, on the rural side, they have a agency assessment that is ongoing, and if they determine, like we did a few years ago, where some routes were moved from the urban system to our rural partner, RCT is now doing US2 commuter. We have TBT doing Route 116. Those types of things, we'll work with GMT as best we can with the range of all of our funding options, competitive not least of which, and sharing last year on those 17 vehicles, $200,000 cost for GMT, which if we were to replace 17 ICE vehicles, it would have been $60,000 a vehicle, local match. So there was an example of, like, let's use VW funds. VTrans has got most of the other funds. You're on the hook for $200,000. We hope that helps with their reserves and other non-federal dollars that they can use for services. And so there's a lot of machinations and discussions to have, but that 3.2 is as concerning to me and our program as it is to GMT. When they mention the downward spiral of, well, we lose ridership and then we don't get stick factors, lose more money, the services aren't in place, so then people pull their funding. Yes, that is the death spiral that we were aware of. We also are aware that for a city the size of Burlington, we have as much or more service than any other town that size. A good example would be Wilson, North Carolina. They had 3 routes in a town that's very similar in size to GMT, and they just now have 7 or 8 microtransit vehicles going around, and they do 10% of the ridership that GMT does. So, you know, the death spiral and those things, there could be a right sizing first before a death spiral is upon us. And certainly we take it very seriously when we see 3.2. We will have to look at facilities and capital operation costs, asking them. Last year, we cut 3 or 4 routes from the rural side of things because they weren't, commuter routes that never really worked before COVID. Now they're really not working. Some other pilots that didn't reveal the success we were hoping for. Well, that picks up several $100,000 that we're able to reallocate to sustain the services that are working. That's the type of work that we continue to urge GMT to do, and we'll work with them on an annual basis. Just as last year, where I didn't include that chart, but you can see overall urban funds in total continues to go up, and a lot of that is our capital
The state funds. are relatively
Two
stagnant.
orange, yeah.
State funds on urban, the top line, is going up. Rural's down a little bit because we did move some of those routes to other rural organizations, as well as a reduction in overall services because of their capacity issues. And so what they were providing 2 years ago is less than what they're providing in 2024. And so we try to post that.
I just might have used up all my time here, but I want to overlay what I'm seeing. So rural funding is going up, urban has been declining, and urban is raising the red flags that we are collapsing on ourselves. And
Rural is the purple, urban is the green.
you can't see because of that thing there. So which
Exactly
one's
right.
which?
The top
So
one
the top
is
one
the
is
urban.
urban.
Okay,
Purple
so
is-
urban is up. All right.
It's up, and it has been up, and that's
Zoom
state
thing
funds.
covers it, so I
Sorry,
can't see.
yeah, I'm trying to do the
I don't think
same.
you can change.
With the, well, I did something, but every year, when Clayton or Nick or Clayton's predecessors talk to us, in their grant application process, we do everything we can to carve out what's sustainable first, what needs to happen. And if that means that it's not 3.4 million that goes to GMT, but it's 4.1, 4.2 or more because of fare box investments, we've been able to do that. It's just ensuring that it's not at the expense of everyone else, where we have people saying, well, we're wearing sweaters, we're not doing our HVAC because it's too expensive in our location. We just want to make sure everybody is trying to pinch the pennies like us. And so I want to make sure that everybody has that comfort level to maintain the not-for-profit mentality. And that's the only way we're going to be able to sustain services. And so when we look from 2019, I'm sorry.
No, I just, go ahead, because I think you're gonna make a point here that I want to hear.
Okay, well, I just wanted to also assuage any concerns that funding has shifted away from one provider or another. And we go back to 2017, but looking at what could fit in the slide here, 2019 to 2024, whether it was the total funds was at 22. This is core budget for operations, so it's admin, PM, operations, and our O&D, or older persons with disability program. 22 to $40 million. And whether GMT was at 22 or 20% pre-COVID, or at 19.9 after bringing some services to TVT, whether it's SEVT or RCT, we've been able to maintain similar levels of funding, even though the pie continues to grow to cover shared cost increases. And I wanted to share with the Board of Commissioners, which I did in December, that we're not leaving you behind. We are trying to maintain this level of support for everyone as we try to deal with these shared issues. There's a lot of nuance and negotiation on an annual basis here, but at the end of the day, they're more consistent than they are fluctuating.
Senator Eads?
What is, just asking the question just out of it, not that it's going to save them in any way, shape, or form, but what are they missing in without collecting fares money-wise?
Pre-COVID, the number that we'd used in projecting would be up to 2 million, 1.7 to 2 million. This new fare system, which is going to be much far easier to utilize and to manage, a little bit more than $1 million. We spent $790,000 on fare boxes from V-Trans's budget to help fit up those vehicles, and they've been using the additional T funds that were made available to cover their losses until they can get these in place.
And that's based on the ridership of what they're doing now?
Those projected ridership, use of discounts, and the whole calculation of what they're going to be getting from fares stands around just over $1 million.
I guess what I'm really concerned about is just, hearing the discussion of it and hearing kind of some other testimonies and comments that were made, is that the safety aspects of what's going on there. And then you just will start going down that path of, talking about cutting routes and talking about, oh, I don't know what we're going to do. And oh, it's not safe to ride the bus anymore. And then it just escalates, and it's not a good thing. I mean, you can't have that negativity out there and expect a good outcome. And that scares the hell out of me.
We understand and agree with Clayton when he says that most folks on the bus are needs riders, and a lot of folks with choices where they can take their own vehicle. You don't need too many excuses to go through and lose the convenience of your own car and get on the vehicle if you have those other negative aspects of the service. We know that GMT has been working with the Department of Health. We're trying the de-escalation training, those types of measures, but it is one of the largest issues. If it wasn't the financial issues at GMT, the safety issues and dealing with that would probably be the number one priority. And I know that it's really one and 1A.
But correct me if I'm wrong, and I don't want to put words into your mouth or anybody else's mouth, but you see a path forward. I mean, you see a path forward with some structural changes. You're just basically saying, hey, maybe we ought to just do this in a little bit different way. I think you guys would be okay.
I would say we need to pull out all the stops this current fiscal year and into next to see what that true revised sustainable number looks like. And that is either when I'm back here next year saying, I think we're going to be able to manage this, or that I join the clarion call of concern.
Yeah. But
we do have some work to do before we're here looking for additional 3. And the other question is that this budget here, which this was pre-carbon reduction funds, that we were hoping that we could sustain our services with flat budgets, let the pilots work their way through, and not take on major investments outside of the commitments we already made to electrify and do these microtransit pilots, improve demand response. So if we were charged with adding more services, then we would then be right next to GMT saying, well, we really can't expect more T funds to support the program at this time. So, but for right now, we need to really redouble our efforts with GMT, continue to offer as much assistance as we can over our grant application process, and see what that new projection looks like at this time next year. And we are asking our providers to put in more local funds, because there were a few years where they were able to build those up when we were paying for most everything at 100% federal. So, it's always been a challenge. One thing I want to bring up is this 5.125 for operations. That's almost all the funds we get from FTA formula funds, and that can be used for operations. Over here, when we talk about the federal dollars, we can use CMAQ for operations now for indefinitely, but we use almost all of our FTA formula for operations. In most states, we'll use that for admin and ops and PM, but for us, our big concern 5 years ago pre-COVID was, wow, we may hit up against those federal dollars, and any new funds or new services would almost have to pay 100% non-federal, or find more CMAQ dollars, which are used for a variety of programs in the agency. We still have some latitude in between our flex dollars at 20.9 million. You can see that we increased the GMT direct flex, because after so many years, we know that it's not going to be 3 million. It's going to be more than that. And this is reflected in your white book right now, except we added this 3.65 to the 5.125 in your white book, combining maintenance and operating.
You're going to pass them then?
I do have new inserts for your white book, and the small item is 8.25 in FTA competitive from our low-no funds. Now that we get so many funds, we don't just spend them in one year. We have to program and plan and project what we're going to be receiving. So the big increase this year was going to be the FTA competitive 8.25 million, up from 5 million in this fiscal year.
Can we take out the whole number 9 and put this one?
Yes.
In? Is that what you're saying?
That's correct.
Can you remind me what the carbon reduction funds come from?
Whoops. Carbon reduction funds are coming from the FHWA program, and you may have heard from Andrea Wright managing that program along with Patrick.
Is that what it's called, carbon reduction?
That carbon reduction funds are with specific funds in the FHWA program. And in the fall, we were looking at where does transit play a role in the planning of using those carbon reduction funds, reduction of the footprint and best use of all the things V-Trans does. And not insignificantly, the electrification of our diesel and gas cutaways to the e-sprinters with some of those funds made a lot of sense.
But this is using 7 million a year. How much total?
That's 4 million for the vehicles, and then we were planning to put in $3 million to the MTI
What's the
program.
total carbon reduction funds for the state? Is that it, or is there something else?
You're looking at me now.
Total carbon reduction funds for the state to manage.
Thank you. For the record, Michelle Boomhauer, Vermont Agency of Transportation. I believe that the total was 32 million over the 5-year period of the IIJA.
It was part of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you just call it that, not carbon reduction, maybe.
Well, I was just going to put this all in the FHWA flex line, but for the purposes of today, to show that using 4 million on our e-sprinter vehicles, and that $3 million could support e-vehicles providing microtransit services, improved demand response services, other TDM actions. It really allows us the most flexibility and equitable process to award these funds based on applications that will be coming to us in the summertime. So we expect our providers, where we're interested, to apply for some of those funds. Some of our partners like Community Rides potentially, and our TDM actors like CATMA in Chittenden County or the Upper Valley TMA, the bike loan, the e-bike stuff. So the MTI program would go from a $500,000 program to $3 million, which could allow for us to invest in 3-year service pilots.
Yeah.
So that's, that was really exciting for us. But when we put the weight book together, this wasn't in stone.
Right.
And so now we can finally add it to the budget and show that it's not a 0.8% increase, even with the FTA competitive, but a significant increase that will allow us to do more things for more folks. And could that help us, provide more dollars for urban or other services? This is all hands on deck, and we have other agencies like Agency of Human Services on Recovery and Job Access, carbon reduction funds. We're being considered through a lot of different agencies and activities.
Okay, great. Any other questions for Ross?
Thank you as always.
Yeah, I see.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. We're gonna switch to Logan. As soon as Ross vacates the seat.
Thank you, Ross. That was very good. Very good.
You have the Zoom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll throw it up.
I take over.
Yeah.
Center.
Yeah.
I was just waiting for the switch. I can go back. See what it has on.
Ross, is this yours?
Thanks.
You take care.
Okay, favorite topic, gas tax. That's right.
Went up 4 cents.
Not allowed to hear anymore. Just good, just
My
good.
ears perk up when you talk revenue.
He was just walking by.
I was just in the building. You can share the screen as soon as you get invitation to do so.
Yeah, I'll put it up.
Tell me where to go, Megan, I'll look at it.
The lounge,
Lounge, they have it there.
Delia.
We'll love it on form if you leave.
Yeah, I can do.
I drink a lot of coffee too, so I'm good.
You see kids, will bring her with you. Take a minute. I can look it over. Develop tougher questions.
See here, perfect. Good.
Yeah, I mean, we can, I guess we can get started. I mean,
We can wait too.
they might ask questions that we already went over.
Sure.
You have 5 pages of data here for us.
Sure, quick.
So when on slide 5, the total state and federal gasoline diesel taxes by state. Oh, I see, one gasoline, one diesel, just giving us the total. And so the federal obviously is the same for every state, so by comparing this, you know what the state is.
Yep.
Is there any state that has no?
No gas tax?
Yeah. What is the federal tax?
As in Logan's presentation. It is 18 cents, 18.4 cents.
So I go to that, the Arkansas, it's like 39 cents. That's been like 27.
Sure.
And so you show the average, so we're, well, yeah. And this is the average just by cent.
Correct.
So we're 12.1?
For the state tax?
Yeah.
Yeah, correct. That goes into the transportation fund, and there's a 1 cent petroleum cleanup fee.
Yeah.
So I'll just run through it real quick. So for the record, Logan Mooberry, fiscal analyst, Joint Fiscal Office. Gonna go through a brief presentation on the gas tax. Vermont has a hybrid gas tax, so it has a fixed tax and then 2 variable assessments. Those are calculated quarterly based on the price of gas. We have a state fixed tax total of 13.1 cents, with 12.1 going directly into the transportation fund, mainly into the transportation fund, and then 1 cent for petroleum cleanup fee. And then we have the 2 variable ones, so 4% motor fuel tax assessment that goes into the T fund, and then a 2% transportation infrastructure assessment that goes into the TID. And then on this screen, you have the sort of breakout of all the different taxes, where they go, and that.
I forgot that Fish and Wildlife got some of the gas tax.
Yeah, small portion.
Was that to offset the damage that gasoline vehicles are doing to Fish and Wildlife? Or do you know the history?
I'm not sure why that was put into statute. Then more into the gasoline assessments. So there's the 4% motor vehicle tax assessment, which goes into the T fund. As I mentioned, there is a minimum and a maximum on that assessment. So it has a minimum of 13.4 cents, which would kick in if gas was at or below $3.87. And then it has a maximum of 18 cents, which would kick in if gas was above 5.08. Then we have the 2% for the TIP fund, or that goes into the TIP fund. This only has a minimum, which is at that 3.96 cents. That kicks in when gas is below 2.48, and there's no maximum to that one.
Okay, can you show that again on the table? I didn't follow that.
On the TIP,
So both of them are on this table.
I was able to to the right there. So you'll see here under the 4% that since about Q3 of February, or sorry, Q3 of fiscal year 23, we have been at the is the minimum,
MFTA is again.
the motor fuel tax assessment. Yeah, motor fuel transportation infrastructure assessment. Yeah. So right now we are collecting the minimum amount, and we have been since Q3 of fiscal 23, which is the 13.4 cents.
Not only that, it's only been 2 quarters that we weren't, because even before that we were collecting.
Correct. Yep. So there's been the 2 quarters in, I guess, the beginning of fiscal year 23, where we collected more than the minimum on the gas, or for the T fund. So for the TIP fund, you'll notice that we're not even at the minimum yet, and we haven't reached that minimum on this list. It is not on there.
And that
So-
minimum is the 0.396.
Correct. So gas would have to go below $2.48 for us to reach that minimum.
So
Do you have any historical context of how often this has fluctuated and when it was last changed, either the minimum, the maximum? How many times has the legislature tweaked this?
I know they have tweaked it, and I think Chris can probably speak more specifically to that.
Yeah, Chris from Joint Fiscal. Yeah, I can be here to phone the friend with any questions that come up that predated Logan's tenure. But my understanding is, since this was put into place, the only real substantive change that has happened was establishing that 3.96 cent minimum in the TIB assessment. These rates that were put in probably about a decade ago at this point, and the rates themselves are recalculated every quarter, but the actual structure in statute, I think the only time it was substantively changed in recent memory was putting in that minimum.
But the both tax assessments put in at the same time.
I think one might have been put in before the other one, but they were pretty close. Like within a few years of each other.
And that was like 10 to 15 years ago.
This was like, yeah, late 2000s, early 2010s, when the TIB was first set up. That was the first piece I think that went in, was the 2% assessment.
So it should,
Just a general rule of thumb, 1 penny on the gas tax raises how much a year?
Logan can handle that one.
So Vermont is expected to tax 283 million gallons. So if we increased it by 1%, that would yield approximately 2.38 million, or 2.83 million, sorry.
One more penny.
Makes sense, we going up, Tommy.
Dummy tax.
and the gallons of gas has come back from, remember, presentation.
The pandemic, yes, but down since 2005, I believe, was about that.
It hasn't come back completely.
This 283 million gallons is, well, that's the projection.
Yeah, that was for the January consensus forecast.
You know, when I first started, Mr. Chair, and we were updating fiscal facts a few years ago, that 283 million gallon assumption was 305 million gallons. So it is not fully rebounded from pre-pandemic levels, which sort of intuitively makes sense when you look at hybrid work and less traffic on the roads. And it is not expected to exceed pre-pandemic levels.
This is very helpful.
And then diesel tax, if you're interested in this, we have the 28 cents to the T fund and then 3 cents to the TIP fund. Those are just fixed rates. And then this first line here,
Do you know why we didn't do a percentage for diesel, but we did it for gasoline?
I do not, I'd have to go back and look to see that.
I don't, Mr. Chair, but I think it might also have to do with the fact that demand for diesel is a little less volatile sometimes in relation to price fluctuations relative to gasoline. Diesel tends to power the economy, tends to have a little fewer
Yeah, I think there's some
discretionary.
federal restrictions or something like that as well.
There might have been, but you know, the fact of the matter is, what we collect in diesel is not a enormous percentage of our overall T fund revenues, and it tends to not fluctuate very much from year to year. It's relatively stable.
And the comparison, as we were talking about, just looks at all the different states.
It's only Interior gallons of gas, 66 million gallons of diesel
I believe so, yes.
versus 300, 280.
Yeah, so it's far less, the gas tax.
I wondered if it was declining.
Not as much, no, so I can pull up the forecast.
It just seems like
Yeah.
diesel vehicles seem to have died way down, but there never was enough of them. No, they're not?
So the diesel tax is a slight change over the 5 years, but if you look, it's sort of right around 17.8, 17.7. So with a shorter or a small decline to 17.5 in.
Because we have more diesel trucks, and so that's changed, so we don't have the diesel sedans that we used to have, but those were never a lot, but we have a lot more diesel trucks, and they use a lot more fuel.
Well, the diesel, you have the diesel, you have the diesel 1500s now that are, and they're just the regular passenger trucks. And a lot of those aren't even charging a premium to order them that way. There, you can get the diesel option for the same as the gas.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, if I may, you tend to see more fluctuations in diesel consumptions based on overall economic cycles and trends. Again, diesel powers the economy. It powers construction vehicles, commercial trucking. You tend to see those fluctuations coincide more with broader macroeconomic forecasts.
That's what I got.
And that's where we are.
Yep.
So it would be difficult for somebody if they did want to change the maximum or the minimum. The difficulty is with the MFTA, you gotta do it on the average price over the last quarter. Is that how that's figured?
If you wanted to raise the minimum and maximum, you could theoretically just change that number by a penny.
If you wanted to figure out what the revenue impact was.
So, yeah, you'd have to, if prices went up, you could have changes, but as it stands right now, we've been collecting the minimum for the past, over a year. So if you raised it by the minimum by a penny, you would theoretically be.
So I thought there was, one of the assessments was based on the average retail price of gas during the prior quarter. They both are.
Yeah, both calculated the same way, the 4% and the 2%. The only difference is the minimums are different, and one has a maximum and the other one doesn't.
The maximum and the minimum, as far as the price of the pump, those don't change.
I mean,
It's on the average price.
it's based on the tax rates that are levied, so it's an algebra problem that you're solving for. The minimum rates are set in statute
That's a dollar number.
as a cent number, a cent per gallon number, a rate. The algebra that you work through to get at the break points at the pump price is based on what those effective tax rates are, also factoring in the federal tax and everything else. Something that the committee should keep in mind is, if there was interest in increasing sort of a minimum rate that would be in place all the time, you could also look at the fixed gas component and not the variable assessments. I would strongly caution the committee to not undercut the variable nature of the assessments, because I think the legislature was very intentional when it created a price sensitivity component in this hybrid system. So the extent to which the minimums might be increased, you would be removing a degree of that price sensitivity and sort of undercutting the intent of the hybrid system, which is to bring in a little bit more money at times when prices are higher and demand might be a little bit lower, but at the same time, costs borne by the agency are not going down, because the price of energy is baked in every activity they do.
So the assessment changes with the average price, but that calculation of what the minimum is as far where it kicks in as far as the dollar per doesn't change.
I'm not sure I'm following your question.
So the minimum, when the minimum sets in, the 3.9 cents is always going to be at $2.48 a month for the tip, or does that $2.48
Assuming
change?
all else is equal. I mean, if other tax rates change, that would change.
Yeah. Assuming the tax rate's same, but that average price calculation doesn't affect at what price the minimum.
This is the algebra, this is, you back into the number that way.
You only use the average price when you're actually figuring how much taxes.
They take the average price, then they subtract out all of the taxes that were charged in the prior quarter to reach that tax adjusted price you see in column F.
Right.
That is what you then base the 4% and 2% calculations off of.
Because I thought at one point, somebody was telling me that the minimum price changes, but it's always gonna be for the tip, $2.48.
At current tax rates, yes.
Assuming the feds aren't gonna raise the tax rates because they haven't done so since 1974.
Or assuming you all don't change the petroleum cleanup fee or
Right.
fixed component or anything else. This is based on what the rates are in effect right now under current law.
Which makes sense.
Does the 1%, both of you does the 1% petroleum fund hold a fairly sizable balance?
1 cent.
Yeah, but does it hold a very sizable, are we burning through that money fairly
Yeah.
well? I mean, I know some projects that it's unbelievable as far as, what, I know one little small project in Barton, what it spent, I can't remember the numbers, but it was significant, but there's not a huge balance sitting in that fund.
My understanding is a fair amount gets raised and a fair amount gets spent out of that petroleum cleanup fund every year. And there is a report that I think is generated every year on the legislative website that details the various accounts in the petroleum cleanup fund, how much came in, how much went out. And that's pretty easy to get.
That's on the total gallon, so it's the 2.83, or it will be 2.83 million next year.
That would just be from gasoline, but yes.
It's also on diesel, correct?
And it's also on, I believe, and Mr. Dakota could weigh in, it's not just on transportation fuels, it's on other fuels as well for petroleum.
Heating fuels.
In Matt, I'm a member of the Petroleum Cleanup Fund Advisory Task Force, and so we monitor the expenditures and the collection of those funds. As an appointment from Agency Natural Resources, and yes, it's on heating oil, dyed diesel, kerosene, diesel fuel, clear diesel fuel, and gasoline. Pay on all those fuels. Collected on on-road fuels monthly by the DMV, collected monthly by the tax department on the heating fuels. All goes into a fund that pays for cleanups or grants or new tanks and loans.
So I could think it's red tag and they need a new tank, that fund helps with those.
Helps with underground gasoline tanks, underground diesel tanks, underground heating oil, above ground heating oil tanks and kerosene tanks. It's an incredible program that is unlike that they have any other state. I'm just enormously proud of it. My work on it. It's a public insurance fund that we all pay for that cleans for environmental remediation that works really well.
So it doesn't matter if it's a homeowner that has a tank leaking in their crawl space or basement, or a gas station that has a huge tank leaking, right? We
Right.
both can apply.
Everyone pays into the fund and everyone gets the benefit with a very small deductible.
Are we the only state, or it's just kind of rare the way we set it up?
Other states have had it, but other states have rated those funds for other purposes, and we have fiercely protected it because it works so well.
It used to be a $10,000 deductible. And I know there's one little site in Barton, last time I knew, this was some years ago, it was up over 500,000 on a $10,000 deductible.
That was the maximum.
And they're still monitoring it.
To Senator Engel's question, I don't know if I heard the answer from Chris, but I'm curious if Mr. Dakota knows it. Is it well funded? Are we running out? Do you anticipate more need for this in the future? Should we be considering this money?
We're at the cap.
What is that?
The Environmental Protection Agency requires us to stop collecting it if we don't spend it fast enough. And we're at the we have $6 million in the bank, as detailed in that report that was issued on January 15th. That doesn't mean that we're flush with money. It means that there are a number of projects that we need to work on, like the Barton and elsewhere, where we need staff, or we need contractors to do the work.
I haven't heard of too many times where there's been somebody that had the deposit, the initial funds to start it up, that they've been denied. If there was a need, you know more about it than I do, but I know a lot of people have utilized that fund and it's worked well, I thought.
It works well, the cash is there, we need to use every penny of it, but getting the contractors to do the work, to the remediation, to close sites that are no longer need to be monitored, it takes time. and people,
It's all in DC.
all within Department of Environmental Conservation. Anna Borowski runs the fund. She does a great job.
Right, it's a good report. I've used it to try to get to the numbers of gallons sold.
So that's, you can back in that way, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions for Logan, Chris, Dakota, Michelle? We can ask her questions.
For your lunch.
Okay, well, thank you, Logan. That's helpful. And then we'll have it on our website. If we forget, we'll go look at it again.